Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today we're going to be doing season previews for all teams in the AFC West. If you haven't seen, we've done all the previews for every other team outside of the AFC and NFC West. So go check those out. As always, if you don't know ball, want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know who you think is going to win the AFC West. We're going to start off here with the Denver Broncos. We're going to give our narrative, kind of discuss the upcoming season, what we think is going to happen for the Broncos, what their kind of goal is, or what our goal that we foresee for the Broncos this year. And to start off, I guess kind of looking at what they did last year, Dobbs, the narrative is how far can Sean Payton carry this team? Because without Sean Payton last year, that team is probably not winning more than 4 or 5 games. Like, the roster is so barren and bare bones that he was able to elevate that team to another level. We saw them get 70 dropped on them by the Dolphins, and I don't think people realize like how bad the team actually was and how much Sean Payton did to improve the roster or get the most out of the guys on the roster.
No, absolutely, Hunter. And that's the kind of the problem with the Broncos, which is what makes them such a hard evaluation this offseason is, right, if we were to look at this roster, and again, it sounds like I'm harping because we've talked about this before, but it's more just like it doesn't get talked about enough. Like I feel like, the NFL media as a whole and everybody, they haven't prepared Broncos fans for potentially the reality of the situation. And that's why the narrative goes back to Sean Payton, because like we say, Sean Payton is kind of like your whiteout. He erases a lot of the mistakes, He makes the paper look a lot better than it really is. But the reality of the situation is when you're looking at the depth chart is like, man, oh man, this team is, to your point, it's just bare bones right now. Right. And again, let's not sit here and act like they don't have some quality starters. They don't have good football players. They do, right? Like as far as the O-line goes, you have Garrett Bowles, you have Quinn Miners. Miners just got locked in on a long-term extension. So it's not like it's all bad, but we go across the board. I mean, the receiving core is pretty barren. Your best receiver is unfortunately very likely to get injured statistically at this point. Just he's been injured for the last few seasons. He gets injured. It's unfortunate, Courtland Sutton, but it's the case. Wide receiver 2, Craig Reynolds. I mean, we come over to the defense. Again, you basically have 2 interior backers almost playing edge rusher for you at this point. And not that they both haven't actually turned into relatively productive 3-4 edges. They actually have. That's not the problem. The problem is that the interior linebackers are a mess. The DB depth is a mess, minus Pat Surtain. And again, as I like to bring up, Pat Surtain's coming off of a pretty rough year last year. Yes, can you attribute that to the attrition of just being on the Broncos defense and all the shit that he had to deal with being thrown his way every week? Like, yeah, you probably can. But like realistically, Pat Surtain was not the best player on the Broncos defense last year. And I guess that's the last thing you want to hear if you're a Broncos fan, because you already don't really have a lot of talent on the defense. The defense is where things get really problematic. The offense is kind of just where things start. And it gets even worse when you consider that you're banking on a guy who's really, really, really dependent on having an O-line that's going to protect him very consistently, on having a good receiving core around him. And just back to the narrative here, Hunter, Sean Payton is going to have to develop him perfectly for this Broncos regime currently to kind of, in mine and your opinion, have much shot to do anything, especially being in the AFC West. It's just kind of a mess right now.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, especially when you have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes in your division. Really, like, they are the number 1 team in the NFL. And you have the Chargers, who have Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh. Now, I guess the big thing is Bo Nix does have a ton of experience. So while I do think that he is going to need to be developed, as any rookie or anybody coming to the league will, the fact that he is so experienced and Sean Payton is one of the better coaches in the league, I think obviously everyone's going to have a jump, but I'm not super concerned with the transition of Bo Nix into the NFL, especially because it's not like he's coming into a team, and most rookie quarterbacks that are drafted in the top 15 are is not coming to a team that's ready to really compete now, but we saw what the Broncos were able to do last year. So if they're able to keep that record, they can at least remain quote unquote competitive, even though we know they're not going to win anything in the stacked AFC right now. So I think, I do like Cortland Sutton there, and Marvin Mims hopefully can take a step. But I think also getting Bo Nix's teammate from college, Troy Franklin, to get in there. They already have chemistry. It'll give him some confidence. Like, I think another thing too is a lot of people don't really look at Bo Nix as like a mobile quarterback, but he's somebody who can use his legs when he needs to and rush for the first down. And I think that's going to add another element to the Broncos offense that, I don't know, like Russ, he's not running around like that anymore. Like, he's older and everything like that. So I am obviously, as most people are not very, I wouldn't say a lot of people are excited for Broncos football this year. Like, let's be fair. Like, I'm interested to see what Javonte Williams can do. I'm interested to see how Bo Nix pans out. But all in all, like, this team is really not set to be exciting just due to the fact that the roster talent is pretty low, and I'd like to see what Audric Estime can do. But it's just kind of like, it feels like the first year of Sean Payton was kind of like, let's evaluate what we have here. Okay. This year is, okay, we tore down what we didn't like. We're putting in our foundation now. It's going to be a long-term plan, and we're going to see what we got this year. Because the reality is, even if the Broncos are sniffing a playoff spot, they're sniffing that wild card, that 7th seed, I don't see any way they win a playoff game this year. And that's okay. That in reality, to me, that's okay, because we know what the Broncos are. Everyone should know what the Broncos are. And if you don't, I hate to say it, but you're being a little bit delusional.
Well, yeah, and let's just say it like this. If they were to somehow go and do all that, because I was going to say, to your point, Hunter, I would not be surprised, Broncos fans, like, let me be clear, despite the roster, would not be surprised at all if you guys end up winning 8 or 9 games because of Sean Payton. And even
Right.
to your point, the wild card thing. And let's just say that they pull a New York Giants circa 2022 and they find a way to sneak one out against a much better team. We see where the Giants are at nowadays, right? Like, it doesn't, as we always say, it doesn't mean anything.
It wasn't
unless
good.
You
It was actually probably detrimental to their future having that season.
Well, exactly. So it's like, just because you win a playoff game, again, me and you, look, so people look at it differently. Some people say that builds culture. If you didn't, to me and you, if you didn't go all the way, you were the same as the team that finished with 0 wins. It's the same. It's the exact same concept. One of them, the team with 0 wins, just gets much better capital going into the offseason to build their team.
Well, unless you traded it all the way like the Broncos have the previous seasons, but yeah.
Oh, right, exactly. And that's what makes the Broncos even more of an enigma to decipher, because they have all of the weirdest makeup you could think of for a football team. But we get to witness it, and we get to see how the Sean Payton experiment ends up working. So it's really just a big W for all NFL fans. We get to see a new experiment in action. We'll get to see what the results look like.
All right, let's move in to the team that is probably going to get talked about the least, the Kansas City Chiefs. Our narrative is obviously, can they three-peat? And when you look at the roster, I mean, they got better, no? Like, they improved this offseason. And, you could argue that you may see a dip in secondary play after moving L'Jarius Sneed. But my thing is, I guess my thing is, corner play is probably the most volatile play that you'll see in the NFL. So there's no guarantee that Sneed was going to have the season that he had last year, this year. Not to say he wouldn't be a very, very good corner. But when you look at who they added, from the receiver perspective, in Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, and, Rashee Rice, I don't know if he's going to be suspended or not. Like, that is a very, very formidable wide receiver room, especially if Kelsey's able to, remain healthy and, not drop off with age. Pacheco's good. I am a little bit concerned about the left tackle spot with Kingsley Suamatia. And then obviously you have Wanya Morris backing him up. But with that being said, it is very interesting to see because that's what we saw kind of last year. Is they went out and got Jawan Taylor and they signed Donovan Smith, right, to fill that role because we know what happened. We saw what happened in the Super Bowl versus Brady when Mahomes doesn't have a line, when any quarterback doesn't have a line. It has nothing to do with Mahomes personally, specifically him. But it's just they're kind of gambling on inexperience here at the left tackle spot. With that being said, though, they brought back Chris Jones. Like, there's really not much to talk about with this team, in my opinion, other than, like, if everyone performs the way they're supposed to, why would they not be able to three-peat?
Well, exactly, Hunter. And this is the analogy I'm going to use is because I think a lot of people listening will be able to resonate with this one. And even if you can't, you're going to know exactly what I'm saying. So it works perfectly. Back in those days, Hunter, when you used to make like a Madden franchise and your team wouldn't even be that good, right? Like you'd be rebuilding, let's just pick a random team. And you'd be rebuilding them a couple seasons in, but you've got a quarterback and he's got the elite development trait and he's got the maxed out stats. And you're just out there having a fucking field day with him. You're like, I don't really care that my corners are 74 overall. I don't really care that my D-line is a bunch of 74 overalls. I don't care that my O-line's a bunch of 78 overalls. Like, I don't care that, and I'm not saying that's right. The Chiefs, you get my point. I'm not saying that's the Chiefs. The point is you can have a ton of holes on your roster, but you don't care because you're like, I'm gonna go out there with my gunslinger and we're gonna go find a way to win this game. It doesn't really matter. I'm gonna just make all the plays that I gotta make. We're gonna win this game. That's how the Chiefs have felt for the last 2 years. And now this year, it's kind of like, they went from just being the team that just had the guy, and they were not like, again, Chiefs fans, I'm not discrediting you. Yes, you have the best D coordinator in football. It's not just Mahomes, but the point is that you can rely so much on just the favorable outcome of having the most important position filled that you got to just glide by on that. And now all of a sudden, not only do they have the best quarterback, the best D coordinator, all the other great pieces that they already had. Well, they basically filled almost all those holes this offseason, Hunter, and they got much better, to your point. I mean, really, where could you address that they got worse? They definitely didn't get worse in any areas. All their young guys from last year, they were already ascending, like Leo Chenal, are very likely just going to make McDuffie, are just going to make another jump this year. So realistically, the Chiefs went from like being not necessarily the best roster and still winning the Super Bowl to being pretty much confirmably the best roster. Now the expectation is to go win the Super Bowl. I mean, that's kind of just the only way you can say it, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when you would watch Brady in the playoffs. It's like, well, until he loses, I can't bet against him. And it's just, this one was really, I mean, this was one of the hardest teams to do and also easiest because it's like, it's hard to really come up with scenarios where they don't repeat success that they've had because we've seen there's such a late year team and it doesn't really matter who they play in the playoffs, like they're going to win. So it's just one of those where it's like, okay, what do you want me to say? Like outside of injury, which really could hamper or hinder any team in the NFL, the Chiefs are poised to repeat again until somebody stops them. I mean, it's to me, it's Mahomes, the Chiefs, and 31 other teams. That is how it was with Brady and the Patriots at times where it was Brady, the Patriots, and 31 other teams. Like, they are ahead because of the quarterback play, because of the coaching, because of the drafts that they have had and the players that they have retained and the culture that they have built. So, Dobbs, I don't really know if there's much more to discuss with the Chiefs, unfortunately, just because it's like, I mean, dude, I think they're going to try to take the top off of defenses again this year with all the speed they have. Like, are they going to revert back to kind of early days with what they were doing with Tyreek Hill, where they're just beating teams deep? Like, is the explosive play coming back? Like, interested to see how defenses try to stop the speed they have in the wide receiver room.
Oh yeah, no, it's going to be. I think we're seeing an over 5,000 yard Mahomes season again. And then last thing I just want to say on the Chiefs, and then we can move on to the next team because it was a great point you brought up. Too many fans every year, and this is something that the Chiefs and the Patriots dynasties are both, just like that on. And more people have got to realize it's not always the worst thing in the world. If anything, sometimes it seems to be trajectory for good stuff in the future, right? The Patriots always used to start 2-2, 3-2, whatever. And Chiefs really do the same thing a lot. And you always hear the media and the fans and everybody's like, the sky is falling. Like, they're not the same team. It's like, no. They're just saving the best football for when it's the most important. It's that January, February, December football we always talk about. It's when it matters most. If you're showing up then, good things are going to happen. The Chiefs and the Patriots figure that out. So, maybe more teams will start to figure it out sooner than later. It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. The Chiefs definitely embody that as the modern day dynasty.
If you come home with the trophy, that is really all that matters. Moving in to the Las Vegas Raiders. Our narrative for the Raiders was AP the right head coach hire? And I think I can get out ahead and say this, Dobbs, and I think you feel the same way. I mean, the answer is yes. Due to the situation that the Raiders were in where they didn't let Bisaccia become the head coach, like they chose not to hire Bisaccia after he took over that team and kind of changed it around. If they did the same thing to AP, I feel like there would have been a serious issue with the players, especially because, they fired the GM, they fired the head coach. So it's kind of like, okay, so you made the wrong hires. We're telling you this is the guy, and you don't want to hire him. And it's kind of frustrating. And I guess here's what I'll say: this hire, regardless of what happens this year, good or bad, does not really hurt the future of the Raiders, right? Because they're already in flux with their quarterback position. You have, a star in Max Crosby, but when you look at the receiver room, you have an aging star in Devontae Adams. You know that he's going to want to win. So if he's not there, if he's not like winning, you can trade him. Regardless if you get a ton for him, you're going to want to get something for him, right? And you have Aiden O'Connell, you have Gardner Minshew, but are you really sure that any of these guys are going to be your future? So you might be selecting a new. It's just my main point with the Raiders this year is they're so in flux that this season is really more about figuring out the direction of your franchise than anything, right? Like, that's how I would look at it if I was a Raiders fan.
No, absolutely. I think, and the way I'm going to look at it here is I'm going to say, and it's kind of funny because I don't know why I haven't thought of this till just now. But really, in a sense, you could say that the Broncos and the Raiders have a very similar situation going on, despite the fact that the Broncos do have, on paper, significantly less talent on the roster, right? But from the standpoint of very, very competitive division, you are very statistically likely not going to win the division. So let's start with that. So we already can scratch that off. We're moving to, okay, we're going to be a wild card team, best case scenario. And then best case scenario, we have to win 4 games in a loaded AFC. All right, again, back to how we always like to bring everything back to statistics. Statistically, the chances of them doing anything of relevancy this season is just an incredibly low single-digit number. But kind of like the Broncos, same thing. It doesn't mean that that's the end for AP. I don't think it means, if anything, AP almost kind of gets a year to really, I don't want to say like having no pressure, but really, there really can't be that much pressure on AP this year because the reality is just, I think the only pressure is just to have that defense still firing on all cylinders. Because like we're saying here, Hunter, the offense just realistically is not going to be a world-beating offense. And even if it gets to being a midline type of offense this year, that to me is best case scenario. Like, there's already reports coming out that both Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew are both really struggling. And if
I did
they're
see that.
both those are your QB 1 and 2s. Like, that's already not a situation you want to be in. Well, and again, I know it's the running joke, but it's actually true at this point, is we're basically on a crash course for a Devontae Adams crash out. Like, Devontae Adams is going to demand his way out of there sooner than later. The writing has been on the wall, right? And again, I know Raiders fans don't want to hear this. They don't want to talk about it. It's a sore subject. But as a realist and someone that's only grounded in reality, we got to talk about it, Hunter. He's constantly acknowledged how maybe he kind of regrets leaving the Packers, or he constantly has felt the need to justify why he came to the Raiders. And to me, who someone looks at, I look at things kind of from a psychological perspective. To me, that's verbalizing subconsciously that kind of deep down that you really didn't make the best move for winning, which
Well,
obviously is what Devontae cares about the most. We thought it was the money at first, but clearly with all the money he's getting in Vegas, you can see it on his face. You can see it in the interviews. He's not happy with the results. So he definitely wants to get back to winning. And that's something that's on the timeline here, Hunter.
I think a big thing though, Dobbs, like kind of to go back at your point is I also think the fact that they traded Derek or cut Derek Carr was one of the biggest. Like he wanted to go play with Derek Carr because that was his college teammate. And I don't think he was expecting them to move on so fast. And I think he felt that they had a better chance at winning with Derek Carr at quarterback. And he's kind of been in flux this last year. They don't really know what's going on this year. So it's like he knows his future in the NFL is not super long, just due to the fact of his age. And he's at a franchise right now that really doesn't know what their future looks like. So he doesn't want to be in an area of uncertainty. Now, with that being said, I do think the Raiders are in an advantageous position in terms of the fact of you're not expected to win your division because it's super strong. You can get a last place schedule if you don't play that well this year. But it's just one of those situations where they're going to have to decide if AP is the long-term future after this year. They're going to decide if they need to take a quarterback round 1 next year, which is, we're a long time away, but not a lot of people are fans of the quarterbacks in this draft. And I don't know. You have young players. You have Max Crosby still. You have Brock Bowers. You have Michael Mayer. You have Jacoby Myers. You have Zamir White. You have Dylan Lobb. I don't know. The Raiders at the end of the day are just kind of like, we need to figure this year out because we need to figure out what we are this year and what is good to keep around, because beyond that, I don't see like the long-term play for this team. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't see the clear path where they make the playoffs and win a playoff game.
No, I think, and just to kind of like round it out here, I think the last thing I would say is if we're talking about like what the plan is, realistically, the only thing I could see is look, you're going to be building around Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, and Max Crosby. Especially if Malcolm Kuntz can make another big jump this year, I will say, something that a lot of maybe more casual, I hate using that word, but people that haven't kept up with the NFL as much this offseason or last season, the name Malcolm Kuntz to a lot of people right now, maybe they're like, I don't know, what is this guy talking about? No, if Malcolm Kuntz can make another jump this year, and forget even if he just plays how he played last year, the trio of Kuntz, Wilkins, and then Crosby, like that's a really ferocious unit. And again, if he makes that jump and becomes truly, because he's teetering between good and elite from last year. If he can just make that jump to being a full-blown elite edge, and then you have two edges that are elite with a really, really productive, just multi-use interior like Christian Wilkins, all right, I can see the vision down the road with that. But to your point, Hunter, on the immediate future, the Raiders are just realistically in for a decently uphill battle, unless miraculously Aiden O'Connell turns into an absolute diamond in the rough. But again, statistically speaking, it's not likely, and therefore we're much more likely for the uphill battle.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much all we need to say about the Raiders. I know it's a hard team to talk about because it's like what are they trying to really accomplish this year, And I think it's kind of trying to figure out what those variables are and what like the clear path of the future is. So
last thing before we move on. I couldn't do them like this. Last thing before we move on to Tyree Wilson also playing on the interior now as opposed to the on the exterior. If I'll add him to the mix, if he can somehow become the player that some people thought he could be on that interior, and all four of them are going crazy, okay, now you really start to see a vision down the road of young, disruptive guys on that D line. And you really do have a fair O-line as well. So the trenches, you know what, Hunter? I can see it, but it still is an uphill battle nonetheless.
Moving into our last team of the AFC West, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. And our narrative for the year is, are the Chargers the most underrated team in the NFL? My answer is yes. Dobbs, what is your answer?
I would say I wouldn't look. I don't know if I'm ready to say they're the most, but they are certainly up there, and there's no doubt about that. And like we talk about, a lot of people are maybe, and even though they've accepted it, they might be underestimating how much of an impact that bringing Harbaugh into this team is going to really bolster them, right? And again, I like my big thing is right when we go to the Chargers and you take a look at that O line, right? You're saying to yourself, okay, we need, okay, first things first, Zion Johnson's got to make a big jump. But Harbaugh is the perfect guy to come in and to see that jump this year. And then, okay, added Bradley Bozeman, moving Trey Pipkins over to guard, interestingly enough. And then we got Joe Alt on that right side kicking with Rashawn Slater. If Joe Alt is the player that I'm pretty certain that he is, him and Rashawn Slater are going to be an absolutely dynamic tackle duo for the next 5-10 years, right? So you already have that, one of the pretty much the two most important positions on your football team minus the quarterback sorted out. So you're in a really good position as far as that's concerned. And then Khalil Mack coming off the career year, if K Mack can have a similar year next year again, and again, this D line's a little bit weird because Joey Bosa, you never know how to feel about how many snaps is Joey even going to play that season. They added Bud Dupree. Tuli Tuipulotu plays on the outside and the inside, but he's very productive wherever he plays. Yeah, I think they're leaning much more towards kind of moving him mainly to just the interior this year. But regardless, the Chargers, the bottom line is they have a lot of good young talent, a lot of good ascending guys like the Alohi Gilmans of the Chargers. Like you got guys, you got Derwin James. I don't know if you saw this, Hunter, talking about how he's going to be involved in some offensive packages this year. Like it sounds like the Chargers. The Chargers are cooking up something quite interesting over here on the rest of the AFC West. And, back to the point of them being underrated. A lot of people just kind of forget about them. The Chargers are one of those teams that could easily sneak in here, uppercut a few teams when they don't expect it, come out and steal one of those wild card spots, maybe even steal a wild card game. It's definitely absolutely not. It's not in the realm of very unlikely, especially when you got a quarterback like Justin Herbert, who I think is going to make up just a hell of a jump this year. No other way to say it. Lad McConkey looking like he could be his best friend in 12 months. The Chargers definitely did set themselves up for a very smooth transition into what's the right word here? Because it wasn't like it was the rebuild. It was kind of like it was the competitive rebuild, and they kind of set themselves up perfectly for this year being the first result of that competitive rebuild, I think is the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think one of the main things, Dobbs, that we have to think about is Harbaugh has really won anywhere they've gone, right? And the Chargers not winning games these last couple years has not been because of lack of talent. It has oh my Lord. It was because lack of coaching talent. Coaching.
You mean that war criminal down there?
Bro,
I can't.
yes.
I refuse to say his name, but
Yeah.
You remember that war criminal down there in South Carolina? Or South Carolina, I mean Southern California.
Man, we're all over the place. But with that being said, I think just on coaching alone, it should grant them at least 2 more wins, 2 more years. Golly, I'm all over the place. So my concern is,
you see what Brandon Staley does? You see what Brandon Staley does to your brain,
He's got
bro?
me in a blender, dude. He's got those fucking yoga poses before the game. He's got me in a blender. So, anyway, with that being said, we're getting all over the place. But I think, I struggle with the skill position room a little bit. I don't trust J.K. Dobbins to stay healthy. They have Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal. I do think Lad McConkey is going to be an interesting player to watch out for. I think it will be very interesting to see how well or how involved he is in the offense. Now, I think he'll be very involved, but I'm talking more terms of like volume of like how many targets he's going to get. Now, we know this is a Greg Roman offense, so they're going to run the ball a ton. Herbert right now, mind you, this is going to come out in like a week or so it may be better, but he's dealing with a foot issue. And I heard the issue from what I was reading, it's not something that's horrible, but it just doesn't necessarily go away quickly. So that might be something he's playing with during the season. Easton Stick is not really that good. They signed Luis Perez, who played in the UFL. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year for the Chargers, but I do think that the fact that they still do have that edge presence in Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, and then you have that Derwin James and Asante Samuel. I think this team is probably, when I say most underrated, I think my big thing is I think they're one of the teams that a lot of people are writing off this year. I think they have a very good chance to finish second in their division because of the coaching and the way that they run this team. So I think they're not going to be playing for a playoff spot this year. I still think they need, to add to their rooms. And it's kind of funny, Dobbs. Think about this. So you have a team like the San Francisco 49ers who builds a lot through their skill positions on offense, right? And they're willing to pay one guy on the line and then kind of not neglect the rest of the line, but just kind of have people that you feel okay putting out there. The Jim Harbaugh is all about the line, and it's like, fuck the skill positions, which is really funny. It's really like an opposite approach to building your team, and they both work. So it just shows that, like, if you can set a culture, right, and you can get the right players for your type of scheme and your type of roster construction, that it can work, and it can work really anywhere you go. I'm really interested to see how Joe Alt plays, but mainly for all that being said, I think the Chargers are going to be competitive in every single game they play this year, and that is not something that you could have said with Brandon Staley at the helm.
No, it's absolutely not. It's absolutely not. And last thing I want to say, I want to get it's not even a hot take off. It's really not at this point. I think a lot of Chargers fans are on the same bandwagon, but I think you're on the same bandwagon too. Look, I still think Gus is going to be getting those red zone touches. Nobody's taking those away from Gus. Gus might have another 10 plus touchdown season, right? But with that said, I do think that this team is Kamani Vidal's to take those majority reps by halfway through the year. But I could be totally wrong. But I do think if any of the teams I'm feeling where it's like, well, that's not even true, right? Like, I actually would say the Giants more than anyone else. But for one of the few teams where I'm like, that rookie's just going to come in and just steal that starting job, I think that it could happen real quick with Kamani Vidal here. So just had to get that one off my chest before we move on.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how they work. Dobbs, who do you think is wide receiver one when the season starts? Or who do you think, I should say, has a better season? Josh Palmer or Ladd McConkey?
I honestly think that we're going to see Ladd McConkey go for like 95 plus targets this year. So I think I'm going to say Ladd, just like you were saying, purely off volume. Like, and I think the hands are going to look good. I think the route running is going to look crispy. But even if they don't necessarily this year, I think just off pure volume, I think he'll finish with the better year.
Do you think Quentin Johnson is on this team next year?
I think I'm sticking with him. He was my boy. Again, I'm always honest on my takes. He was one of my boys in last year's class, but you can go back. They can check the tape, Hunter. It's all out there still. I said, as much as I like him, I do think he's going to have a Devontae Adams-esque struggle with the drops the first few years. And if he can turn that around, he can be a really productive receiver. That it's all on record. Now, you know what? I'm leaning towards he might not. You're
dying on the Quentin Johnston hill.
But I'm not one to back out on my guys too early, Hunter. So I got to give him at least another year. I'd be
wiping my hands at him. I don't know, man.
I did at some point midway last year, and then I saw him make a few plays, and I was you know what? I gotta hold on to him just a little longer. Just a little.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been team previews for every team in the AFC West. As always, if you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments who you think will win the AFC West. And as always, thank you and have a great rest of your night.